Etsy knows these aren't the sounds of holiday gifting.
Oh.
Well, not the ones you're hoping for.
Okay. Thank you?
You want squeals of delight.
Yes!
And spontaneously written songs of joy.
I am so happy. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
To get those, make everyone on your list feel heard with gifts like personalized jewelry, custom artwork, vintage pieces, and home decor. For original gifts that say, I get you, Etsy has it.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and there's been a deluge of F1 news this week with Dan Fallows and Niels Wittich out, the announcement of F1's group launch for 2025, Alpine confirming Mercedes engines for 2026, and Sauber's mooted sale of a stake. I'm Edd Straw, and joining us to discuss this flurry of activity are Scott Mitchell-Malm and special guest Christian Menath. Well, Christian, we'll come to you first. Some of our listeners might not be familiar with your excellent work, given it's mainly in German, but perhaps you could tell everyone who you are. Show us your credentials.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ed. Hello, Ed. Hello, Scott. Yeah, I'm doing Formula One for Germany's Motorsport Magazin. So we have a print magazine. We have, of course, a website and do a lot of video stuff nowadays as well.
That sounds very, very familiar. And yes, always on the ground at F1 and always at the Pirelli tyre briefings, which I think is always a positive sign for anyone covering Formula One. And we've got Scott Mitchell-Malm, as usual, as well, looking very Swedish and football-y today.
That's not a very good reference for an audio-only podcast, but yeah, I'm wearing my Djurgården football jersey. I guess, I don't know, memoriam of a season that's ended without any kind of meaningful success, I suppose. But yeah, that's about as interesting as my clothing gets today. This is quite, in terms of the type of question that gets asked by the three of us at F1 races, this is right up there for the more niche podcast lineups we've had, isn't it? In terms of that kind of granular detail, specific, specialist kind of reporting. I think we cover that base quite nicely, don't we, Ed?
Yeah, I think all of us are prone to asking fairly detailed questions and talk about graining and that kind of thing. So if that doesn't get everyone excited for the podcast that's to come, I don't know what will. But we've got lots to get through, so we'll pile into it. And Christian, we're going to start off with the news of the departure of F1 race director Niels Wittich. And you're the perfect person to ask about this, as not long after the FIA announced he was stepping down, you broke a story with some very interesting details about what really happened. So what do you know?
Well, first of all, I was super surprised, I think, as all of us, about the news that came out not via a press release, but via a statement on the FIA WhatsApp group. So that's big news. And there are a lot of FIA press releases recently about everything. But then we get a new race director and there is a statement on a WhatsApp group. And I just didn't see it coming. So I tried to get Niels and ask him what is it about. And I tried some other people to ask as well if they know something about it, but no one knew. And eventually I got Niels on the phone. He was at the airport, and then he told me that he didn't resign. He didn't step down. So the story that was communicated is a bit different to the true story.
Yeah, and that was very interesting because I think we instantly suspected it might be something like that. And obviously, Niels went and said a great deal beyond just clarifying how it's happened. But Scott, what was your first reaction, and what did you make of it when you saw Christian's story about what Niels had said?
Yeah, it was. I echo Christian's sentiment. It was such a surprise because it's very, very rare in F1 that everybody's blindsided by something, and this really came out of the blue for a lot of people in a lot of different kind of parties from within the FAA as well. And normally this kind of stuff does get telegraphed a little bit in advance. There are there have been a few murmurings by the sounds of it that something might change on the race director side at the end of the year. I think that any kind of change in the structure or personnel can never be ruled out of this era of the FIA, because Mohammed Ben Sulayem's presidency has kind of been characterised by a lot of turnover in the senior positions. But for this to happen 3 races before the end of the season is extremely unusual, and it immediately smacked of there being more to it than just the race director suddenly deciding to step down. And even if it was something that someone in the FIA, the president himself potentially, most likely I would say, wanted to make a change happen, to do it now just seemed really strange. And so yeah, when I saw that Christian had heard firsthand from Niels that he had not stepped down, he had not resigned, that immediately answered the question of, did he jump or was he pushed? What is still confusing at the moment is what the motivations would be for wanting to push him out 3 races before the end of the season. It feels like if he didn't want to go, then it can only be some kind of slightly rash or petty reaction to some kind of disagreement or something that has happened in recent weeks. It's very... Of all of the things that have happened in the FIA over the last 2 or 3 years, I do think this announcement might be one of the strangest.
Yeah, and we're obviously getting into the point where we're trying to work out what the string of cause and effect was here. Obviously, they've announced that Rui Marquez will be taking over from the Vegas race, and the Vegas race is not a straightforward one for the race director. But Marquez has done F2 and F3, so kind of knows the way that the F1 weekends work.
Yeah, I agree that he probably knows how the F1 weekends work, but the problem for me is not the competence of the race director. I mean, it's difficult enough to get a competent race director because the rules in Formula One, as we all know, they are so incredible complicated. The team managers, they are experts in their field. They have experience of 20 years and a lot more. So they are absolute experts. And then you have a new race director coming in. He dealt with F2 and F3, and I don't know which other series and so on, but it's all the racing series are different. And there is the pinnacle of motorsport is Formula One, and it's also the pinnacle of regulations. I don't know if any other series has a rule book as big as Formula One. So that itself is incredibly difficult to get thrown into on short notice. And then on top of that, you have the pressure of TV timings, the pressure of the whole world, the pressure of drivers. And of course, you can say in other series, in junior series, you have drivers, you have teams. Yeah, but they do not put that much public pressure on you as they do in Formula One. So for me, I always say this is probably the worst job in Formula One, because you can only do things wrong. If you do it right, everyone expects it. If you do things wrong, you're the scapegoat of whole Formula One. And I don't know if there are so many people who are up to do that job properly.
The point about pressure is so spot on with 3 races to go, because there is still one championship definitely to be decided, and technically the Drivers' Championship as well. And we saw in Brazil, at the height of Red Bull's feeling of persecution, that actually that vocal public pressure comes on in spades from teams and drivers who feel that they're being wronged. And if you're in the heat of a championship battle, that's only exacerbated. We don't need to look back too far. Go back 3 years, Abu Dhabi 2021, to see how the race director and the way that they decide to interpret things can influence things. Now, that's not to say that is what F1's now heading towards in 3 races' time, but it's another reason why the timing of it, I just don't see any scenario where the FIA or, the relevant people in the FIA who understand this job would want to make this change with 3 races to go, because you can't even really argue that it's 3 races to get used to it before taking the job full time next year. It's such a specific and limited sample set of races to do. It's the worst possible time to make the change, really. So again, it all feeds into the fact that this isn't kind of planned or orchestrated. It just feels like a snap reaction to something going wrong, which unfortunately does kind of seem to be the order of the day within the FIA. Not necessarily every single day, but how many senior figures have now gone? Sporting director, technical director, race director, CEO, head of the Women's Commission as well. Those are just off the top of my head. There's not another organisation in F1 that has that much turnover in terms of the hierarchy.
Well, and that then points us to whether it's a disagreement with the slightly controversial president of the FIA, Mohammed Ben Sulayem. What do you think, Christian? I mean, there's 2 things possible here if we're trying to work out exactly why it's happened. Either it is a falling out like that, or Wittich has done something problematic, or they're disagreeing with his handling of stuff so strongly that they want to make this change basically immediately, right before the end of the season, on the eve of a triple header. So, I mean, can you think of any specific? Because he was doing a perfectly competent job. I know everyone always criticises the race director, but there was no Michael Massey moment, was there?
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem I have to understand it. Of course, you can always disagree, and I had a lot of arguments with Niels about track limits, and I think sometimes he was, in my opinion, a bit too German, and I think I can say that when it comes to track limits, even though it's the way Formula One wanted to go with having black and white rules, and he did it. Of course, you can then always discuss things like the rain in Brazil. Should we have had a red flag earlier or later, or no red flag? But if you listen to the drivers, one said we need a red flag, the other said we don't need a red flag. If you look at Baku and what happened there, should we have had a red flag or whatever? But those are discussions. Those are not mistakes by the race director. So I cannot see a clear cut because of mistakes he did as a race director. And actually, it makes me, when Scott mentioned all the positions, all the persons that left recently the FIA, that made me a bit sad, because with federations in the sports, it's always a difficult thing, and they are not very popular, I think, in any of the sports. But in Formula One with the FIA, I think we have a federation that is a bit different to other federations, and it's such a complicated sport. It takes quite a lot to monitor everything, to regulate that sport. And it's so complicated, and we have so highly skilled people there. So it makes me a bit sad to have the situation we are in at the moment. The real reasons, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think it has to do with the GPDA letter that was not against the race director, that was against the president, but perhaps he needed a scapegoat or whatever? What do you think?
Yeah, I suspect it's been brewing for a little bit longer than that. Maybe that was the last nail in the coffin. I don't know, because I can imagine a scenario whereby, because the race director has quite broad, perhaps they're not just running the race weekend, they do a lot of the dealings with the drivers. It could have been a falling out over how he was expected to deal with them and speak to them and do things. It's possible that, I think if that was part of it, that will have just been like the straw that broke the camel's back, the last little thing. But it feels like there will have been probably a series of disagreements here. That's the way I see it anyway. And it certainly seems this was brewing at the very least throughout the last triple header. Scott, you got any feeling on that?
Yeah, I still think it's a snap reaction to something, but that something could be a succession of disagreements or events. Because if you look at that triple header and how it played out, it was not a good triple header for the FIA. And there was so many different things that cropped up, and that's not me saying that the FIA necessarily did anything horrifically wrong. It just, in terms of the pressure that came over the organisation as a whole, and then ended in that GPDA letter, which called out Ben Sulayem personally within it. You had the track limits. Christian mentioned those just now. You had track limits and racing rules in Austin. Then you had racing rules again in Mexico, where there was meant to be more of a discussion about the swearing problem, but the racing rules discussion became such a big thing, took over with the drivers' meeting on the Friday in Mexico, led to a commitment to update the racing rules and hopefully implement something new before the end of this season. Then we go to Brazil, and again, Christian mentioned it earlier, but the handling of all of that, question marks, not necessarily anything emphatically wrong, but just question marks over whether the right decisions were made in terms of safety in qualifying with the timing of red flags, the race with the timing of the red flag, etc. I can just see within that enough potential for, even if some of those issues, like, for example, drivers swearing and the clampdown on that, don't fall within Wittich's remit, as part of the FIA representation on the ground and an opportunity on the ground at the track to deal with the drivers. Has there been pressure on him to handle things differently? Has he not taken control of the situation in the way that someone in the FIA like Ben Sulayem would have demanded or wanted, even if it wasn't reasonable to expect him to do that? There's just been enough going on over that last triple header to make me think a few different things here could easily spark what I think would be a disproportionate response, but it's not a massive stretch for me to connect those things.
I know that the race audience is very well educated, but I think you always have to make the point that, for example, what happened in Austin with track limits and penalties, the race director is not the one who gives the penalties, who takes the decision. That's the stewards, and I think you have to separate a lot of topics when you say it was not a fantastic triple header for the FIA. I wouldn't say it was a fantastic triple header for the race director, but the race director shouldn't have a fantastic triple header. He shouldn't have a bad triple header. He should just have the triple header because he's handling the things. And I think there was, in my opinion, there was nothing you could argue. We need a new race director. There are a lot of topics, as you mentioned, Scott, but I think not too many for the race director. And then you could say, okay, the racing rules, they are made together with the race director, but then together. It's a big part of it is the drivers, the teams. And so I tried to get some opinions from drivers yesterday, and after the news came out, and the feeling I got is that they have no problem with Niels. They were completely shocked and surprised, just like us.
Yeah, I should add, I'm not suggesting that what's happened over the last few weeks is any kind of justification for pinning it on the race director, or, to use the word that Christian used earlier, make a scapegoat of the race director. I don't think that would be justified at all. I can just see across a sort of swell of pressure on different topics for the FIA and the president himself, because he just ends up in the middle of so many different things now. I can see that ending up in a scenario where someone, for lack of a better way of putting it, lashes out basically and looks for that excuse. And you just need someone that's kind of tangentially involved almost, or maybe even it was other stuff caused problems and tensions, and then there was one specific thing that Niels was involved in that then, because of all this other stuff going on, meant that wasn't handled as sensibly as it should have been handled from the FIA's side or the president's side or whoever, and then there's an unnecessary just consequence for Niels to face there. But again, it just comes back to that point at the very start that Niels said to Christian, he has not resigned over all of this. So someone has been minded to take action that has surprised so many people. And again, that's where it comes down to, while we might not be offering particularly convincing explanations for it, that's kind of the point. There are only theories at the moment, and the only theories that make any kind of sense is that a disproportionate reaction has occurred that has led to Niels being ousted.
Yeah, which then inevitably points to the rather autocratic style of the FIA leadership at the moment. And I think whatever the precise causes, and gradually over time it'll come out, it's just not good for the good running and regulation of Formula One to have this happening so suddenly on the eve of the season. I think that's something everybody will agree with.
This episode is brought to you by Merrill. We all have goals, and we all want to get to those goals, whether that's saving for a home renovation, that once-in-a-lifetime trip to your favourite Grand Prix, or even retirement. We all want a straightforward path to those goals, But the real world doesn't usually work that way. Merrill understands that. That's why with a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalised plan and a clear path forward. And having the bull at your back helps your whole financial life move with you. So when your plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer, registered investment advisor, member SIPC.
Your time and expertise are valuable. And with professionals spending nearly half the workweek on written communication, focus is one of the most important things to have at work. With Grammarly as your AI writing partner, you can stay focused and get through your work faster with relevant, real-time suggestions wherever you write. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. And best of all, Grammarly works across 500,000 apps and websites, allowing you to work smarter, not longer. For 15 years, Grammarly has helped professionals do more with their writing. So what are you waiting for? Get more done with Grammarly. Download Grammarly for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's grammarly.com/podcast. Right, Scott, Wittich isn't the only departure that's been announced, although in the case of Dan Fallows, he's exiting the technical director role at Aston Martin, but staying within the organisation. So, given Aston Martin's struggles, much of a surprise?
No, not really. I think it's been a couple of months since I heard the first suggestion that Fallows might be on his way out of that role, or maybe even the team entirely. There was a little bit of a rumour that he might have resigned and would exit. The fact that he's going somewhere else in the group makes it a little bit harder to determine exactly what happened there. My suspicion, reading between the lines from people I've spoken to and how things have kind of emerged, is that he probably wanted out, hasn't found somewhere else to go. Aston doesn't mind him leaving because maybe they just actually have found out in reality he's not the golden ticket on the technical side that they were hoping he'd be, but they're not willing to pay him off. And therefore, the only kind of compromise solution for both is that he goes somewhere else in the group, because it's very, unless it's in the occasional specific example like this, it's very rare for this to happen and the person stay. Normally, we see them either go to another team or they've been removed from their position and they leave the team because they've been sacked, basically. But no, it's not a surprise, partly because of that speculation, but also because of the Aston Martin trajectory. One person is never the root cause of this kind of thing, but he basically shoulders the burden, doesn't he, and the blame of the fact that they've had such a disappointing 2024.
Yeah, and I think what we've seen with Aston Martin over the past 2 years is they've really struggled with their in-season development massively. The upgrades aren't doing what they should be. They're clearly not. Clearly, the way they're looking at the numbers they're producing in simulation, various tools they've got back at the factory, isn't being done in the right way. And we know a lot of teams under these rules have had to shift how they've crunched the numbers to get your green light for, this is working. So I guess, Christian, regardless of the exact sort of step by step how this happened, it does come down to that, because if Aston Martin was doing what they should be doing in terms of the development progress, then by definition Fallows would be doing a good job, and he is the guy who's in day-to-day charge of the technical side. So that is kind of his wheelhouse, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think that's one part of the story. Then you could argue that Aston Martin at the moment is using the Mercedes wind tunnel. They're using the Mercedes gearbox, and if you look at Mercedes, they are in similar trouble. not to that extent, but they started also from another point. So I'm not 100% sure if it's only the current performance we're seeing at Aston Martin. It was clear that some people have to leave. When you look at the people who are joining, I mean, how many technical directors can you have? I think at one point, Mike Kruk was asked this year in the FIA press conference if they still have the room for an Adrian Newey to join. And then he said, I think we're not at a point where we have 7 technical directors or whatever some teams back in the past had. But they were not very far away from that. So some people at some point had to leave, not only for performance reasons, but also for structural reasons, for monetary reasons, because we all know that there is a budget cap in Formula One as well. And then you mustn't forget that the whole story of Dan Fallows, how he left Red Bull, is also a bit strange. Oh, it was a bit strange. I think there were many occasions where he wanted to leave, but then in the end didn't leave. And so I'm not really surprised that he's still in the group and that it's a bit of a strange exit.
Well, and the important thing is that, as you mentioned, the cost cap there, Fallows, I imagine, would have been one of those, potentially would have been one of those top 3 who was exempt, but then you bring in more people and people may have gone in above his pay grade. But whatever happens, by moving him out of F1, although they're still paying him, that moves him completely out of the cost cap. So that is quite significant given the amount of money I imagine he was on, because he was a prize asset when he was recruited from Red Bull.
The thing in interpreting this is, because interpreting it is the main thing you can do when there is a slightly opaque press release like that. It wasn't the warmest press release, was it, in terms of how it referred to Fallows' contribution and that. Which again is a bit strange, because if he's going somewhere else in the group into a significant role where he's going to make a great contribution, you'd think they'd lean into that because he's got a soft landing somewhere else within Aston Martin, but they haven't. So whether he wanted out or whether the team just wanted to sideline him from F1 activities, it speaks to some kind of either pre-existing tension within the technical structure because there are so many senior figures there, or an incoming tension, because you've got Enrico Cardile and Adrian Newey that are in shifting positions. Andy Cowell is getting his feet under the table as the group CEO now. And I suspect, and I mean this is no disrespect to his predecessor, Martin Whitmarsh, my suspicion is Cowell's having to unpick a few missteps from that side, because Whitmarsh, while obviously a lot of F1 experience, had also spent a long time out of F1 before he took that Aston job. And when you look at Aston admitting to strategic mistakes like prioritising quantity of upgrades over quality of upgrades, I think they basically fast-tracked things to meet a quota effectively to get a certain number of upgrades on the car. And that's first of all, that's bad in general. That's a bad strategy in general, but it's especially bad in a cost cap era, and it's especially bad in what, as Ed was describing, is a very tricky set of technical regulations. You look at what McLaren's done this year with how long they deliberated over introducing that final floor upgrade to be absolutely sure it worked. So that kind of smacks a little bit of a kind of old world mentality with running a team, which I wonder whether that's maybe something that Whitmarsh brought to the table, and Cowell's having to restructure things there. So I just don't think Fallows fit into what Aston Martin thought the solution was to this longer term. If he did, he would not be being sidelined. They wouldn't let him move himself out of the role, however that played out, because Christian mentioned the way he left Red Bull and that. But if you remember the first high-profile time he was meant to leave Red Bull to go to McLaren, Red Bull fought extremely hard to keep him. So if he was intrinsic to the way that team works and the team's plan to maximise its opportunity with Cardile, with Newey, with the Honda Works project in 2026, he'd be there, wouldn't he? He'd still be there in an F1 role. They'd find a way to keep him. So it just very much feels like Aston Martin's not that bothered by losing him, which, considering he joined less than 3 years ago and they were really proud to have got him from Red Bull, I think says something about what's happened in those last couple of years.
And doubtless frustrating timing for him, because he was just about to get his hands on the new state-of-the-art wind tunnel. They've got the driver and loop simulator that they're bringing in over the coming months. So, a big time. And I suspect with the big changes coming with Adrian Newey coming in, they felt that this was the time to make that clean break, of course, with Cardile coming in shortly as well. Another team that's having plenty of interesting news stories going on, Christian, is Audi. We talked last week about Gabriel Bortoleto being signed. There's also talk now of a sale of a stake in what's still called the Sauber team to the Qatar Investment Authority. I guess in some territories I'd have to say it's the sale of a kick. But can you make any sense of what's going on there?
Yeah, it's a bit difficult to understand it completely. But as far as I understand, it's not like a majority they want to take from the team. Audi wants to keep the control of the team, but it would make sense. It would make sense because Formula One, of course, as we know, since there is the budget cap, it can be a pretty cheap thing in motorsport, which sounds a bit strange, but it can be because you have a lot of sponsors. You attract a lot of sponsors. They pay a lot of money. Then you have the prize money. So you don't need that much money for running a good Formula One team. Let's put it that way. But Audi will only enter in 2026. So at the moment, it costs them quite a lot of money. Then they also have the engine program. Just ask Alpine or Renault how expensive it is to run an engine program. And at the moment, as we all know, the German car industry is not in best shape. I think a lot of car manufacturers are in trouble, not only Audi. So they probably have to get rid of a lot of employees. It's not the best time to tell people, okay, we are investing millions or billion in Formula One. So it would be a sensible thing to do to find a sponsor, to find a strategic partner to bring that money that is necessary at the moment. And so for me, you can always discuss about Qatar as a partner or whatever, but that's another topic. But just as a strategic partner, it's good to have someone there at the moment, in my opinion.
And I think that's a clever one from the perspective of it's not just the money that they'll make off of selling a stake. It's also an organisation that will bring other paying partners longer term, I suspect, because the way that works, just because it's Qatar owned, my suspicion would be that if you then got, for example, Qatar Airways on board as a sponsor in the short or medium term, I suspect that would be, and obviously it's all coming from the same kitty in some way, but it's not coming from the Audi kitty, which is the main thing.
I'm happy, Scott, that you said it's bringing other things like sponsors. I'm happy that you didn't say it brings technology or know-how or whatever. That's usually the part they say when they announce something like that.
Oh no, this isn't the Alfa Romeo deal, which obviously had an enormous amount of technology transfer.
Yeah, they will bring just as much technology as Alfa Romeo did with that partnership. But I think, like you both said, it's a pragmatic approach for them to do. We don't know the exact amount they'll be selling it for, but actually Audi bought the team. Certainly the 75% it bought to the team as the original deal, they got it at a very, very good price. I suspect when they bought the last 25% off Finn Rousing, who still owned it, that might have been a bit more expensive. But actually, once we know the exact numbers of this could also be quite a good all-round deal for them, because not only are they getting the money to spend on the team and to develop it, and they can say, well, look, we've released this cash to do it, but also they might have proportionally even turned a profit.
Well, I think there's a decent chance. It obviously depends on the percentage, doesn't it, at the end of it? And you're right, that final stake that they did end up committing to when they went up to 100%, was that at the same relative value as the first 75%, or was it inflated because the team value had increased?
It's got to be inflated, I'm sure.
You'd think so, but I don't know with the way that works. Finn Rousing's not the kind of person that actually needs to make that money. He's just someone who wants that team to be looked after because he's rich enough that he doesn't need to care, which is a lovely position to be in. But if you look at it from, I mean, the numbers were never disclosed, were they? But I think I'm right in saying that the original 75% deal was widely mooted to value the team at around 600 million euros, 650 million euros, somewhere around
which
that.
Which was low,
so,
even for that point.
Yeah. So that is low. And even though Sauber has nosedived in form over the last 2 years, the value would have only gone up because it's going to be Audi's F1 team. And F1 teams in general have increased. If you speak to most people with financial roles or interest in the commercial side in Formula One teams, they all love to claim that every team is worth $1 billion now. And actually, if you look at what Alpine sold that 24% stake at last year, that was near as makes no difference, a total team valuation of around $1 billion. So let's assume, maybe slightly generously, that Audi's F1 team is now worth $1 billion. If they sell, let's say 25%, because that was the original stake they were happy to leave out in the first instance. They were happy to have 75% of Sauber to begin with. And they sell it at a valuation of the team of $1 billion. That's $250 million for that 25%. That's, I mean, not quite, but that's almost half what they could have paid for the whole team to begin with. So you're right, getting that money back, and it will depend on the valuations. It will depend on the percentages. So I don't want to see those numbers appearing anywhere. That's what I'm claiming that the value is, or what stake it's going to be. But you can see why it makes sense, because effectively, with what Christian was explaining before about the sensitivity of the car industry and it's not just Audi, is it? It's the Volkswagen Group as a whole that needs to confront these things. Any manufacturer-backed project, any F1 team that is tied to a car manufacturer is ultimately sensitive to these variables. So I think Audi is effectively confronting the biggest threat to its F1 program that it was always going to have. That threat was always going to be there, that something outside, something in the car industry would make it look very bad to own an F1 team, to be spending so much money on an F1 team when you're closing car plants, when you're getting rid of a load of jobs. It's just they're facing it unusually early because, as Christian was explaining really well, they're not coming in till 26. They don't actually get the massive benefits of being in F1. They're in the most expensive phase of having an F1 entry at the moment, where they've spent hundreds and hundreds of millions on buying a team. They've probably spent tens, and then it must be in excess of 100 million on everything that they're doing with the engine, for example. Like, the cost of this is going to be absolutely enormous, and they're not getting anything back for it at the moment. So anything that can take the heat off of that is going to help, because the biggest sensitivity is to how can you justify owning an F1 team or having an F1 team when the car company is doing this, the parent company is doing that. That's what Audi's had to confront, and is having to confront by doing this. So it's a little bit, for me, it's a little bit embarrassing, because it was only 7 months ago they announced the 100% stake. They made it very clear that this was crucial to accelerating the preparations and stuff like this. So then to go back on that within the same calendar year and go, oh, actually we need to sell, or we don't need to own 100% of it, that it's a little bit embarrassing, but I think it's pragmatic, and I think it was going to happen sooner or later, and I don't think that's necessarily a problem.
And it could be a very, very good partner. The Qatari Sovereign Wealth Fund, they'll be a relatively silent partner. And this model exists. Renault doesn't own all of Alpine. They sold a stake, 24%, a few years ago. Mercedes only owns 1/3 of its F1 team, the team that carries its name. And even back when they originally had it, Abar owned a big chunk of it as well. So, not a crazy model.
Well, Aston Martin still has that arrangement, doesn't it, where I think the Saudi Public Investment Fund is, I don't think they have them, but they have an option for, is it 10% of the shares in the F1 team, as well as being a shareholder in Aston Martin Lagonda. So that's another one. And obviously Mumtalakat, the Bahrain Sovereign Wealth Fund with McLaren. So it was inevitable, wasn't it, that another country in this region would probably want to be involved in owning an F1 team at some point.
While we're on the subject of Audi, Christian, you've got the advantage over us, because I know from being a reader of Race Car Engineering magazine that you paid a visit to their engine facility earlier this year, I think it was, at Neuburg. So what's your impression of how the engine side is going? Because they've invested big there, and obviously won't be till 26 we have any testable on-track indication of how that's performing.
Well, actually, I've been there just a few weeks after they announced the entry into Formula One. So I think it was in 2022. And it was already pretty impressive, I have to say. I didn't expect too much, because I know I knew what was happening at Neuburg, what they did before in terms of motorsport, but it was not up to developing an engine and not up to developing a Formula One engine at all, because they developed cars there. They didn't develop engines. Okay, some parts of powertrains or drivetrains they did there, but no combustion stuff at all. So the whole ICE development didn't happen at Neuburg. So I was pretty surprised how much infrastructure they already had a few weeks after they announced it. It was a pretty clever thing to do because they didn't have a budget cap, because now, as we know, we have a budget cap on the engine side as well. They didn't have it back then. So they could just buy the best dynos and whatever. We all know how expensive they are. They are just built a few kilometers away from our office where I'm sitting at the moment. I think everyone is ordering them from AVL. They are pretty expensive, and they had done all that stuff before. So I think, as you mentioned, that it's impossible to say if they will have a competitive engine or not. They are also missing quite a lot of know-how on the combustion side, in my opinion, especially with the high revving engines, even if they have developed the race car engines in DTM, but it's completely different engines, no experience with pneumatic valves. So there is a lot of things they have to learn, but then the infrastructure is there. They had a very committed partner on the fuel side, which is probably key for 2026. So I see less problems in Neuburg than I see in Hinwil, to be honest.
Which is an amazing thing to say, because I just said the engine side when the project was first announced was the bigger unknown. But yeah, we've talked a lot on this podcast over this year about the troubles at Sauber. So yeah, a long way to go there.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
So, you want to be a marketer. It's easy. You just have to score a ton of leads and figure out a way to turn them all into customers. Plus, manage a dozen channels, write a million blogs, and launch 100 campaigns all at once. When that's done, simply make your socials go viral and bring in record profits. No sweat. Okay, fine. It's a lot of sweat. But with HubSpot's AI-powered marketing tools, launching benchmark-breaking campaigns is easier than ever. Get started at HubSpot.com/marketers.
This episode is supported by Merrill. With a dedicated Merrill advisor, you get a personalized plan for your financial goals. And when plans change, Merrill's with you every step of the way. Go to ml.com/bullish to learn more. Merrill, a Bank of America company. What would you like the power to do? Investing involves risk. Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith Incorporated, registered broker-dealer. Registered investment advisor. Member SIPC.
All right, Scott, another topic that's there's been an announcement about this week. Big change for next year. All singing, all dancing. F1 season launch event at the O2 in London next February with a big crowd of fans expected there. What does that mean for launch season?
It could mean a lot. It could mean very little, depending on what the teams actually do around that launch event. It's tricky because I know different people have different views on launch season in terms of how much it matters and how exciting it really is. Ultimately, livery reveals. I mean, I'm someone who I quite like livery reveals. I quite like it when, even though you know exactly what it's going to look like, I quite like it when football clubs put out their new shirts, new kits for the new season. There's something about it because it's a visual identity thing. It's one of the first things you associate with them. Like, I quite enjoy it, and I think a lot of fans do as well. But for me, the meat of it, the interesting thing, is actually seeing the car designs, and that's become harder and harder as seasons have gone by. Teams hide more. A few teams take the lazy option and only send out terrible renders that actually don't show anything. So we're all left waiting really until pre-season testing. But what we do still get, and what fans get, which is the most important thing, is around 2 weeks or so of this like ramping up of anticipation and intrigue, and you do get little sights of things. You do still get the liveries, you get snippets from teams about what's been prioritised and how things are going, and then testing becomes this grand crescendo of it all, doesn't it? Where it's just this peak of 3 days of just uncovering loads and loads of stuff, seeing loads of stuff, people stop hiding everything. And I really like the way that plays out. It's a fantastic footprint for F1 in terms of coverage, in terms of fan excitement, engagement, and all of that. While I think it's really kind of fun to do something different and have a collective season launch for the first time, the reality is that's all going to be show cars with 2025 liveries on them, and then a massive question mark of what else we see before testing. And for me, I think that event on its own should actually be quite good, but what it means for launch season, I think, lives or dies on whether teams do their own stuff around that. Are they going to put out some renders in the days between? Might we get a few little proper launches? Will there just be shakedowns with some photos from them? That, to me, will define sort of how much substance launch season actually has in 25.
Yeah, that event's going to be February the 18th. £58 to £113, apparently, the ticket price range. But I guess the key question with this, Christian, is whether it dilutes launch season. I think the event will be great and fans who go will enjoy it and people can watch it on TV. But it's whether you're distilling what you could consider 10 hits of F1 coverage kind of into one by doing this, which is probably why there will be some other bits and pieces that people do. So is it a net gain for Formula One?
Yeah, that's a big question. It's a difficult one. I'm not looking forward, to be honest, to that event. But I accept it in 2025 because I think the launch season wouldn't be that exciting, to be honest. A lot of carryover. Also now, when we see the development of the teams, it's so much in the detail that it's not that interesting anymore, to be honest, at least for me, because, come on, you look at the car, they have a new part and you don't even see where the new part is because most of it is with the floor and the details are so small that you cannot even see it with your eye. And I imagine it's going the same direction with it in 2025 with the new cars. It's just evolutions, very, very small evolutions. And it wouldn't be the most exciting launch season, in my opinion. So for that reason, I accept it in 2025. Then in 2026, with completely new cars, then just sell it as a Formula One season launch and not as a livery or car launch or whatever. Just as a Formula One launch, everyone is happy. They can see the drivers. They have a good show. They have music, whatever, and separate it from the launch season because that's something special. Scott said it very well earlier, that the crescendo. And it would, in my opinion, take quite a lot of that away because we like to see all the cars in details. We want to analyze them, if you can say that. And that's also a problem for me at the moment with the races, with 24 races. Every race is so special and is worth to be analyzed afterwards. And it's not possible to that extent that I would like to at the moment because there is just race after race after race. And if you have one day of car launching, you have car after car after car after car, and the whole beauty of our sports gets a bit lost there because the beauty of this sport is in the detail, and we need some time for it.
Yeah, I'd certainly agree with that. I mean, I do think if this event is a success, and I suspect it will sell out, they're going to make it a regular thing. I can't see them not doing it in future. But you need to have that technical interest. And much as people do say, you see nothing technical at the launches, you do get some things. If you look back at the start of last year, some of the themes for the year were set by some of the things we could see, some of the things that could be talked about, etc. So it would make sense that this launch event makes most sense to me as kind of an extra hit on top of all of that. So I suspect we'll see teams doing some what you might call more technical launch things of some form, independent of that.
The biggest disappointment I have for it is I understand why, for logistical reasons, it will only be show cars because it's at such a time-pressured part of the year and you have 3 non-UK teams that need to get there as well. You are not going to divert resources away ahead of pre-season testing to take your real car to London for that evening. I'd be stunned if anyone turns up with the real thing. So the main disappointment, while I understand that, is that if you've got whatever it's going to be, 18, 20,000 fans in that arena to see them. It's a shame because it'd be such a great opportunity for them to actually see the cars in person. And I know the three of us see these cars up close. We take advantage, not everybody does, which I find very surprising in the F1 media, to actually take advantage of the technical opportunity that has now been afforded on Fridays on Grand Prix weekends, where you can go into the pit lane and the cars get put on display and you go up and see them. And I think I've said this a few times on the podcast, but it does bear repeating. You do not understand or appreciate these cars until you see them in person, and you see them in 3 dimensions, and you see how big the cars are. You see how you actually get an idea of how things might interact because you can see them physically. An actual season launch with the real cars that fans can pay to attend, but it'll be much cheaper for them to get to that than it would be to go to testing or a Grand Prix. What an amazing opportunity for them to see these cars for real. And they'll still get a bit of that with the show car, which I think will be really valuable for people that are interested in that sort of thing. But it is an inherent limitation, isn't it? If you have a season launch without the actual cars, you aren't quite offering as much as you could in theory.
What I do think is important is that they're honest about what it is, what you are going to see when you buy a ticket, and then once you're there, what you're looking at, what exactly is this? I think it's really important to be honest about that. Some teams, I would say, have not been great at that, and I think F1 as a whole has a responsibility to the fans to do that fairly and transparently.
I haven't been in the stadium, in the O2 arena, is it called?
Yes, yeah, it's about 20,000 people. Something of that order.
Yeah, but then if you buy a ticket in an arena like that one with 20,000 people, will you realize the difference between a real car and the show car if you're somewhere there in the stadium?
If you're up in the rafters, maybe not. That is a fair point.
But a cynical marketeer might say that. But I think it's just important. So yeah, people will still enjoy it, but I don't think it'll diminish the enjoyment if it's looking at a show car for people, but I'd like them to be honest about it.
Fully agree.
Not be tempted to sell something.
Some of our colleagues don't even see the difference between the show car and the real car, so even if they're standing just next to it. So
some teams are quite bad. I remember some years ago, I think this was 2010, one team launched their car with a rollout in the pit lane. And it was Autosport at the time. We did a piece saying they've hardly done anything from last year. This is terrible, and they had a right moan at us because they said, well, that isn't the real car. It's like, you rolled it out and said it was. And we said you haven't done much with your car because you rolled out what was the previous year's car with a few bits on it and said this is just the previous car with a few bits on it. So and they didn't seem to understand this. But anyway, that's by the by. It's obviously still an old wound. Before we go, we do need to have a quick chat about Alpine. Another announcement on their side, the Mercedes engine deal, that's to be expected. It's going to use Mercedes gearboxes and rear suspension components for 26. But obviously, Christian, they said a bit more than that because they're not going to go down this wider Mercedes supply line in terms of the gearbox and suspension beyond probably next year, beyond 2026, not next year, but 26.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important part of the whole story because as we know, the gearbox casing is where the suspension is in, and there are a lot of discussions about
the suspension carrier, as it's often called by teams, isn't it?
Exactly.
The shell of the gearbox.
So it's a stressed member, a fully stressed member of the car. So it's quite an essential part of the car, which I mentioned earlier that Aston Martin is using the same rear end as the Mercedes, and I think it's a performance differentiator, that part. So if you can do that on your own, you can have a car philosophy, So I was quite surprised to hear that they are using it in 2026 to buy it, but I understand it as well. In the first year of the new set of regulations, it's probably a lot more convenient, a lot easier. But I think it's important for an independent team to be able to build these parts on your own. So it's essential for me for the future of the team.
The two points I would add on that, or stress on that, one is that I think it's pragmatism, isn't it, for 2026 and the start of the deal. Better to have an arrangement that means you do use the engine, get gearbox and rear suspension, because they're coming at it quite late whereas McLaren and Williams have been preparing for this for a long time. And yes, you can't do things like aerodynamic development on your 26 car now, but I think people have been aware of certain geometries and been planning around certain geometries for a long time. Alpine are coming to this late in the day, having decided to axe their own engine program and become a customer. They would be compromised, I think, trying to get their own design around a power unit they're not familiar with ready for 26. It just wouldn't be optimized in terms of what's possible. Then the second point is to build on what Christian was saying about it being a performance differentiator. If you look at it, if they do go in the direction of doing that part on their own, then it becomes much more of a McLaren arrangement than what we see with Aston Martin and Williams at the moment, where they're more dependent on what Mercedes produces. And a crucial difference is, unlike Aston, for example, Alpine, because it has been a works team up until now and is still until the end of next year, they have their own department at Enstone and facilities and capabilities to do this. They've been doing this for a long time. They're not shutting that down. They're not laying people off. They're going to keep that work going on. I think they recently invested in a new gearbox dyno. So they have the facilities and the personnel, the experience and the expertise to actually do this. It just makes sense to have a good pragmatic run up to that in 2027 and beyond. So yeah, I would be surprised if they don't go down that route longer term.
Yeah, I would say actually it restores a few percentage of faith in the ambition of the team. They're not going that way long term. Still very concerned about the overall strategy Renault's got with that team. But I can see it's pragmatic to do that for 2026. Just a sensible move. Right, before we go, just to remind everyone, if you want to listen to these episodes ad-free and have access to our bonus episodes, the Race Members Club could be for you. Head to patreon.com/the race or click the link in the description for information on that. Our races tier is just £4.50 a month, which we think is good value given all you get, plus that entitles you to 15% off at the race shop, where we're currently selling our 2025 desk and wall calendars featuring incredible F1 photography from our friends at XPB Images. So why not order yourself one today, or better, buy one for yourself and get another as a Christmas gift for a friend. That's all for now on the podcast. A big thanks to our special guest, Christian Menath. I've been wanting to get you onto a podcast for a while, and finally have done, and hopefully we'll have you back again in the future. Yeah, head to motorsport.magazine.com to have a look at Christian's work. You can either read it in German or run it through a translator to see some very, very high quality F1 coverage. And Scott, I guess I'll thank you as well. We're going to be back on Monday with a very special themed episode, so stay tuned for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.